My husband smiled and told the client in Japanese, "Ignore the old hag. She is just an ignorant ornament." The client laughed. I kept eating silently, but when the contract arrived, I replied in fluent Japanese. My husband smiled and told the client in Japanese, "Ignore the old hag. She is just an ignorant ornament who signs whatever I say. Tomorrow I transfer her fortune to us." The client laughed. What Richard didn't know was that I had spent 3 years in Tokyo before we met. And tonight, after 15 years of silence, I was done being his ornament.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
The private dining room at Matsuhisa smelled of cedar and fresh wasabi. Richard had reserved it for what he called the most important deal of my career. Mr. Tanaka had flown in from Osaka with 2 associates, and my husband wanted to impress them with his sophistication. He'd even bought me a new dress for the occasion. Navy blue silk, conservative, the kind of thing an ornament would wear. I sat at the end of the table, picking at my sashimi while Richard performed his usual routine. The confident handshake, the bow that was slightly too deep, the rehearsed phrases in Japanese that he'd practiced for weeks with a tutor. Tanaka nodded politely at each attempt, his face betraying nothing. The contract sat in a leather folder between them. $12 million. Richard's firm would handle all legal matters for Tanaka Industries' North American expansion. It was the culmination of 18 months of courtship, business trips, and carefully orchestrated dinners. "My wife doesn't speak Japanese," Richard said in English, gesturing toward me with his sack cup. "She barely speaks at all these days." He laughed at his own joke. Tanaka's associates chuckled politely. Then Richard switched to Japanese. His accent was terrible, but I understood every word. "Kanojo wa tada no kazari desu. Watashi ga yu koto ni nandemo sain shimasu. Ashita, kanojo no zaisan wo wareware ni utsushimasu." The old hag. The ignorant ornament. Tomorrow I transfer her fortune. Tanaka's eyebrows rose slightly. His associates exchanged glances. Richard kept talking, oblivious, explaining how he controlled all of my late first husband's estate, how the money was as good as his, how this deal would cement our position. I kept eating. The yellowtail was excellent. When the contract was placed in front of me for the ceremonial signature, I set down my chopsticks and picked up the folder. Richard beamed. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. His ornament, performing her only function. I opened the folder, scanned the first page, then closed it. "Tanaka-san," I said in fluent Japanese. "I apologize for my husband's comments about me. Before I sign anything, perhaps we should discuss the terms more carefully. Specifically the clause on page 7 that gives your company access to intellectual property I developed with my first husband's firm." Richard's sake cup slipped from his hand. It shattered on the lacquered table, the clear liquid spreading like a stain across the wood. "You speak Japanese?" he whispered. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Mr. Tanaka, who was watching me with new interest. "I lived in Tokyo for 3 years before I met Richard. I studied at Waseda University. My first husband and I built our software company with Japanese partners." I paused. "I also read contracts before I signed them." The room was silent except for the soft music playing from hidden speakers. Richard's face had gone from red to white. His associates were frozen, unsure what to do. "Tanaka-san," I continued, "my husband seems to believe that my fortune belongs to him. This is incorrect. My late husband's estate is held in a trust that I control completely. Richard has never had signing authority over any of it." Tanaka set down his own cup. "Powell-san," he said to me, using the honorific that should have been my husband's, "this is most interesting information. There's more." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small stack of papers. "These are bank statements showing that my husband has been billing your company at triple the standard rate for the past 18 months. He's been overcharging you by approximately $2 million. Richard stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Nancy, what are you doing? This is business. You don't understand business." "I understand theft." I handed the papers to Mr. Tanaka. I also understand that this deal would give you a 30% stake in my trust, which Richard has no authority to offer. The clause is buried on page 47. I doubt you were meant to find it. Tanaka studied the bank statements. His face remained impassive, but I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. When he looked up, it was at Richard. Powell-san, he said, and now the honorific was sharp. I believe we need to reconsider our arrangement. Tanaka, please, this is all a misunderstanding. My wife is confused. She hasn't been well lately. My memory is excellent. I stood, smoothing my navy silk dress. I remember every insult you've spoken about me in Japanese over the past 3 years, thinking I couldn't understand. I remember the business dinners where you called me stupid. I remember the phone calls where you told your partners I was easily managed. I remember it all, Richard. Tanaka rose from his seat. His associates followed. Powell-san, he said to me again, I apologize for any offense. We were not aware of your capabilities. No apology necessary. My husband made sure of that. They left without signing. Richard stood in the wreckage of his most important deal, sack dripping onto his Italian shoes, watching $12 million walk out the door. You've destroyed me, he said. I've started. The drive home was silent. Richard gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I watched the Portland skyline pass by, the lights of the city reflecting off the Willamette River. 15 years I'd lived in this city as Richard Powell's wife. 15 years of dinner parties and charity galas and smiling for photographs. 15 years of being the quiet woman in the corner while my husband built his reputation on my money. When we pulled into the driveway of the house I'd paid for, Richard finally spoke. How long have you been planning this? Planning what? Don't play stupid. You ambushed me. You humiliated me in front of the most important client of my career. I gathered my purse and opened the car door. I didn't ambush you, Richard. I simply stopped pretending. He followed me into the house, through the foyer I'd decorated with art from my first husband's collection, past the living room filled with furniture I'd inherited from my parents. We need to talk about this, he said. We can fix this. I'll call Tanaka in the morning. Explain that you've been under stress. I'm going to bed. Nancy, I'm serious. You can't just... I turned to face him. In the soft light of the hallway, I could see the fear beneath his anger. Richard had built his entire life on the assumption that I would never push back, that I would always sign what he put in front of me, smile when he needed me to smile, disappear when he needed me to disappear. I know about the trust modification, I said. His face went pale again. What? The document you filed last month, the one that would give you power of attorney over my assets if I'm declared mentally incompetent. Brandon's signature is on it too. Richard took a step backward. That was just a precaution for estate planning. In case something happened. In case something happened to my mind, like sudden onset dementia, the kind that might require a doctor's evaluation. I smiled. I found the psychiatrist's number in your desk, Richard. Morrison. You've already had 2 consultations with him about how to have your wife committed. The color drained completely from his face. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing to say? That's unusual for you. You always have so many words when you think I can't understand them. I walked up the stairs, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. At the top, I paused. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss the future. But I want you to understand something, Richard. I looked down at him, at the man who had called me an ornament, who had stolen from me for 15 years, who had planned to have me declared insane so he could take everything I owned. I understand business. I understand it very well. And I understand exactly what you've been doing. I closed the guest room door and locked it. Through the wood, I could hear Richard pacing downstairs, making phone calls, his voice rising and falling in panic. I pulled out my own phone and sent a single text message to a number I'd saved 3 months ago. It started, "Meet tomorrow as planned." The reply came immediately, "I'll have everything ready." I changed out of the navy silk dress and hung it carefully in the closet. Richard had bought it for me to wear tonight, to look appropriate while I signed away my fortune. Instead, I'd worn it while I ended his career. Tomorrow would be harder. Tomorrow, I would have to face the full scope of what my husband had done and what my stepson had helped him do. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. I felt awake. The guest room was small, but comfortable. I decorated it years ago for visitors who rarely came. The bed was soft, the sheets were clean, and through the window I could see the lights of the city I'd adopted as my home. My first husband, Thomas, had died 7 years ago, cancer. We'd built our software company together, starting in a garage in Palo Alto and growing it into something worth $200 million by the time we sold it. When he died, he left everything to me, along with a letter I'd memorized. "Nancy, you're smarter than you let anyone know. Don't let the next man forget it." I'd let Richard forget it. I'd let him believe I was simple, quiet, manageable. I'd signed the papers he put in front of me, agreed to the investments he suggested, smiled at the dinner parties he orchestrated. I'd been so lonely after Thomas died. Richard had seemed kind, attentive, interested in me as a person rather than as a source of money. It took 3 years for me to realize the truth and another 12 to do anything about it. But I was doing something now. On the nightstand, my phone buzzed with another message. This one was from Brandon, my stepson. "Dad called. He's upset. What happened at the dinner?" I didn't reply. Brandon had signed the document that would have stripped me of my rights. Brandon, who I'd helped raise since he was 21, who I'd supported through law school, who I'd treated like my own son for 15 years. Brandon had looked at that paper, seen what it meant, and signed his name anyway. Tomorrow I would deal with Brandon. Tonight I would sleep. But before I turned off the light, I opened the folder I'd hidden in my suitcase 3 weeks ago. Inside were copies of every document Richard had filed without my knowledge. The trust modification, the power of attorney, the psychiatrist consultations, the bank transfers to accounts I'd never authorized, and one more thing. A letter from Richard's first wife, the one he told me had died in a car accident 20 years ago, the one who was actually living in Arizona under a different name, having fled from him after discovering the same schemes he'd later used on me. Richard thought I was an ornament. He thought I was ignorant. He thought I would sign whatever he put in front of me. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. The morning after the Tanaka dinner, I woke to the sound of Richard's voice downstairs. He was on the phone, speaking in the careful, controlled tone he used when something had gone terribly wrong. I lay in the guest room bed and listened through the floor. "No, she's fine. Just a misunderstanding. Stress from the holidays." A pause. "I don't think that's necessary. We can handle this internally." Another pause, longer this time. "Brandon, I need you to come over. Bring Melissa. We need to discuss the situation." The situation. That's what I was now. A situation to be handled. I showered and dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans and a sweater I'd owned for 10 years. No more silk dresses chosen by Richard. No more playing the part of the elegant wife. When I came downstairs, Richard was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes, we do." I poured myself coffee and sat across from him. "Start with the document you filed with the county clerk on November 3rd. His jaw tightened. "That was estate planning. Standard procedure. Standard procedure to change my trust so that you become the beneficiary if I'm declared incompetent? Standard procedure to give yourself power of attorney over assets I inherited before we were married?" "Nancy, you're misunderstanding." I had my own lawyer review it. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photograph of the document, marked up in red ink. He was very interested in the section on page 12. "The part where you backdated my signature on the original trust amendment, the one you forged 3 years ago." Richard's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "That's right. I know about the forgery. I know you changed my trust without my knowledge in 2021. I know you've been siphoning money from accounts you shouldn't have access to, and I know Brandon helped you do it." Brandon was just following my instructions. He didn't understand. He's a corporate lawyer, Richard. He understood exactly what he was signing. The doorbell rang. Brandon and Melissa had arrived earlier than expected. Richard stood up, his face a mask of false calm. "Let me handle this. You should go upstairs and rest." "No." He stared at me. In 15 years of marriage, I had never refused a direct instruction. I had always been agreeable, accommodating, easy, the perfect ornament. Nancy, please, this is family business. I am family, and it's my business you've been stealing. Brandon walked into the kitchen before Richard could respond. My stepson was 36 years old, tall like his father, with the same confident posture and expensive haircut. Melissa followed behind him, her laptop bag over her shoulder. They both stopped when they saw me sitting at the table. Nancy. Brandon's voice was careful, neutral. Dad said you weren't feeling well. Your father says a lot of things. I gestured to the chairs across from me. Sit down. We're going to have a conversation. Melissa glanced at Richard, who gave a small shake of his head. But they sat anyway, because refusing would have been too obvious. I know everything, I said. The trust modification, the forged signatures, the power of attorney, the consultations with Dr. Morrison about having me declared incompetent. The bank transfers to accounts in your names. I looked at each of them in turn. I've known for 3 months. Melissa's face went pale. Brandon's jaw clenched exactly the way his father's had. If you've known for 3 months, why are you just bringing it up now? Brandon asked. Because I needed time to gather evidence, and because I wanted to give you all a chance to stop on your own. I took a sip of coffee. You didn't stop, so now we're here. Richard leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Nancy, this is all a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect you. Your memory has been, my memory is perfect. I remember the day we met, Richard, March 15th, 2009, at a charity gala in San Francisco. I was there alone because Thomas had been dead for 6 months and I was trying to rejoin the world. You were there because you'd heard about the wealthy widow and wanted to introduce yourself. Richard's face flushed. That's not... I remember our wedding. June 22nd, 2010. You insisted on a prenup, which I thought was honorable. You said you didn't want anyone thinking you were marrying me for my money. I didn't notice that the prenup you drafted gave you access to accounts I'd never agreed to share. Brandon shifted in his seat. Melissa was staring at the table. I remember the first time you called me stupid in Japanese. It was at a dinner party in 2012. You were showing off to some clients and you said, "My wife is beautiful but not very bright. She believes whatever I tell her." I smiled and nodded because I didn't want to cause a scene. I've been smiling and nodding for 15 years while you stole from me. I never stole. $437,000. I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the table. That's how much you've transferred to personal accounts since 2015. Accounts in your name, Brandon's name, and Melissa's name. All from trust funds that were supposed to be managed conservatively for my benefit. Brandon opened the folder. His face went from pale to gray as he flipped through the pages. Bank statements, wire transfer records, account summaries. Everything documented, dated, and highlighted. Where did you get this? He asked. I hired a forensic accountant, the same kind your firm uses when investigating corporate fraud. It turns out the skills transfer quite well to personal finances. Richard pushed off from the counter and walked toward me. Nancy, let's discuss this privately. There's no need to involve... Sit down. He stopped. I'd never used that tone with him before. Never in 15 years had I given him an order. I said, sit down, Richard. He sat. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you're going to call your attorney and have him prepare documents reversing every change you've made to my trust, every signature you forged, every account you accessed without authorization, all of it, undone. And if I refuse, then I go to the police with evidence of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Oregon takes financial exploitation of vulnerable adults very seriously. You could face up to 10 years in prison. Brandon, too. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. Brandon had gone completely still. You wouldn't, Richard said. You'd destroy the family. You destroyed the family, Richard. When you decided to treat me like a bank account with a pulse? When you taught your son that stealing from his stepmother was acceptable? When you planned to have me committed so you could take everything I owned? I never planned to have you committed. I pulled out my phone again and played a recording. Richard's voice filled the kitchen, clear and unmistakable. The psychiatrist says it'll take about 6 months to build a case. We document incidents, get witnesses to testify about her confusion, and by spring, we can file for guardianship. Once I have control of the trust, we move everything offshore. The recording ended. Richard's face had gone from red to white to a sickly gray. You recorded me. Oregon is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of. That was from February, when you thought I was sleeping in the next room. Brandon stood up. Dad, what is this? You never told me about guardianship. Brandon, sit down. This doesn't concern you. You were going to have her committed? That's not what you said. You said it was estate planning. You said it was to protect the family assets. It is to protect the family assets. Your stepmother isn't capable of managing. I built a company worth $200 million. My voice was calm, steady. I managed Thomas's estate for 7 years after he died. I've served on 3 corporate boards. I speak fluent Japanese, French, and Spanish. But please, Richard, tell me more about how I'm not capable. Brandon sat back down slowly. He looked at his father like he was seeing him for the first time. The guardianship, he said. That's why you had me sign that document. You said it was just in case something happened. You said it was standard. It was standard. Your stepmother was going to need care eventually. Her memory. My memory is fine. Your lies are the problem. Melissa finally spoke. Her voice was small, barely above a whisper. Brandon, I told you something was wrong. When you brought those papers home, I told you we should have them reviewed. You knew? I asked. I suspected. The numbers didn't add up, but Brandon said his father knew what he was doing. He said we should trust the process. Brandon turned to his wife. You never said. I said it 100 times. You didn't want to hear it. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, I could hear birds singing in the garden I'd planted 5 years ago. Inside, a family was falling apart. Here's the situation, I said. I have enough evidence to send Richard to prison. I have enough evidence to get Brandon disbarred. I have enough evidence to destroy everyone in this room except Melissa, who seems to have been smart enough not to sign anything. Melissa's eyes met mine. I saw gratitude there, and something else, relief. But I don't want to destroy anyone. I want what's mine. I want my trust restored to its original state. I want every dollar returned. And I want a divorce. Richard laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. A divorce after 15 years? 15 years of being called stupid. 15 years of being treated like furniture. 15 years of watching you spend my money on clothes and cars and trips while telling me we needed to be careful with expenses. I stood up. Yes, Richard. A divorce. And you should consider yourself lucky I'm not pressing charges. If you divorce me, you'll have to split the assets. Oregon is an equitable distribution state. The assets are mine. The trust is mine. Everything you've accumulated during our marriage came from money you stole from me. My lawyer has already filed a motion to freeze all joint accounts pending investigation. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. You can't do this. Dad, tell her she can't do this. She can do this. Melissa's voice was stronger now. I've seen the documents. I've seen the bank records. Everything she's saying is true, Brandon. Your father has been stealing from her for years, and you helped him. I didn't know. You're a lawyer. You knew exactly what those papers meant. You just didn't care because you thought you'd benefit. Brandon stared at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd been treating her the way his father treated me. Another ornament. Another signature on whatever papers he put in front of her. I gathered my folder and my phone. You have until noon tomorrow to call your attorney, Richard. If I don't hear from him by then, I go to the police. Wait! Richard stood up, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Just wait. Let's talk about this. There has to be a solution that works for everyone. There is. It's called justice. You can either accept it voluntarily, or I can let the courts impose it. I walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, and out the front door. Behind me, I could hear Richard and Brandon arguing, their voices rising and falling. Melissa said nothing. In the driveway, I got into my car. Not the Mercedes Richard had chosen for me, but the old Honda I'd kept from my first marriage. Thomas had bought it the year we founded our company. It still ran perfectly because I'd taken care of it, the way I'd taken care of everything Richard had tried to destroy. I drove to a coffee shop downtown, where a woman was waiting for me at a corner table. She was in her late 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes and a stack of papers in front of her. "How did it go?" she asked. "About as expected." He's panicking. Brandon's starting to realize what he did. "Melissa might actually turn out to be an ally," the woman nodded. "I have more documents for you. Financial records from the firm. Richard's been overbilling clients for years. Tanaka wasn't the first. How many? At least 12 that I've found so far. Total overcharges around $4 million. I took the papers she offered. "Thank you, Diana." "Thank me by putting him in prison." Diana Powell, Richard's first wife. The one he told me had died in a car accident 20 years ago. The one who had actually spent 2 years in hiding after discovering what kind of man she'd married. The one who had reached out to me 6 months ago with a simple message. "I know what he's doing to you. Let me help. Are you sure you want to stay hidden?" I asked. "If you testified, I have a new life now. A good life. I don't want him to know where I am." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "But I can give you everything you need to destroy him. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to finally stop him." I looked at the papers. More evidence of fraud. More evidence of theft. More evidence that the man I'd married was a predator who targeted vulnerable women and took everything they had. Richard had called me an ornament. He'd called me ignorant. He'd planned to have me committed so he could steal my fortune. But Diana had found me. She'd given me the tools to fight back. And tomorrow, Richard would learn exactly how wrong he'd been about the quiet woman he'd married. The ornament was about to speak again. And this time, everyone would listen. Richard didn't call his attorney by noon. Instead, he called Dr. Morrison. I found out because Melissa called me first, her voice shaking on the other end of the line. "He's filing an emergency petition. He says you're having a mental breakdown. The psychiatrist is coming to the house this afternoon." I was sitting in the lobby of the Heathman Hotel, waiting for my own attorney. The news hit me like ice water. "How do you know?" "Brandon told me. He's conflicted, Nancy. He knows what his father did was wrong, but he can't bring himself to turn against him. So he's going along with the plan while pretending he doesn't understand what it means. And you're calling to warn me. I'm calling because it's wrong. All of it. I've been watching Richard manipulate everyone for years, and I'm done pretending I don't see it." She paused. "There's something else. Richard made Brandon call his contacts at the firm. They're going to try to freeze your accounts before you can freeze his." "When?" "This afternoon, 2 o'clock. I checked my watch. 11:30. "Thank you, Melissa. I owe you. Just stop him, please." I hung up and immediately called my attorney, Sandra Hayes. She answered on the first ring. "We need to move faster. Richard's trying to get me committed today." Sandra's voice went sharp. "I'll file the restraining order now, and I'll call the bank personally. They can't freeze your accounts without a court order, and I can challenge that the moment it's filed. Do whatever you need to do." "Nancy, are you somewhere safe?" I looked around the elegant lobby. Business people with laptops, a couple checking in at the front desk, the normal world going about its normal business while my life collapsed. I don't know. Go somewhere Richard doesn't know about. Don't go back to the house. I'll call you when I have news. I hung up and sat very still for a moment. 15 years I had lived with Richard. 15 years I had let him control where I went, what I wore, who I saw. I didn't have anywhere to go that he didn't know about. Except one place. Diana had given me an address 3 weeks ago. A small apartment in Northeast Portland, rented under a different name. "In case things get bad," she'd said. "In case you need to disappear for a while." I'd thought she was being dramatic. Now I understood she was being practical. I took a taxi to the apartment, watching the city pass by through rain-streaked windows. Portland in December was gray and wet, the kind of weather that matched my mood. When I arrived at the building, A nondescript brick structure with a security door. I used the code Diana had given me. The apartment was small, but clean. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a window overlooking an empty lot. On the counter was a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside, I found a prepaid phone, $500 in cash, and a note. If you're reading this, things have gotten worse. Use this phone to contact me. The number is programmed in. Don't use your personal phone for anything important. Richard knows how to track it. Diana thought of everything. She'd been through this before. I sat on the small couch and tried to process what was happening. In the space of 24 hours, I'd gone from being Richard Powell's quiet wife to being a target for commitment. He was moving faster than I'd expected, faster than I'd prepared for. My regular phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. "Mom, please come home. Dad is worried about you. We just want to talk." He'd called me Mom. He'd never called me that before. It was manipulation, transparent and desperate, and it shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. I'd helped raise Brandon for 15 years. I'd paid for his law school. I'd attended his wedding, hosted holidays for him and Melissa, treated him like my own son because I'd never been able to have children of my own, and he'd signed the papers that would have taken everything from me. Another text, "We're not going to do anything drastic. Just come home and we can sort this out." I didn't respond. Instead, I used the prepaid phone to call Diana. "I'm at the apartment. Richard's filing an emergency petition to have me committed." "I know. I have someone watching the courthouse. The petition was filed 20 minutes ago. How do I fight it?" "Your attorney can challenge it, but that takes time. Richard's going to try to have you evaluated before Sandra can get a hearing scheduled." Diana's voice was calm, the voice of someone who had been through this herself. "The key is documentation. You need witnesses who can testify that you're mentally competent. People who've seen you recently, who can speak to your state of mind. I don't have many friends. Richard made sure of that. What about business contacts? People from your boards? Anyone who's seen you in a professional capacity recently?" I thought about it. The charity boards I'd served on had all been Richard's choices, populated by his friends. The corporate boards I'd joined after Thomas's death had slowly been replaced as Richard convinced me to step back from public life. But there was one person. "Tanaka," I said. "The client from the dinner?" He saw me speak Japanese. He heard me analyze a contract in real time. He watched me expose Richard's fraud. I stood up, pacing the small apartment. He can testify that I was sharp, coherent, and in full control of my faculties. Would he be willing? I don't know. But I saved him from signing a contract that would have cost his company 30% of their North American profits. That has to be worth something. Diana was quiet for a moment. "I have a contact in international business law. Someone who works with Japanese companies. Let me make some calls." After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the rain fall on the empty lot. This wasn't how I'd expected things to go. I'd thought I had time. I'd thought I could expose Richard's crimes methodically, build an airtight case, and walk away clean. Instead, I was hiding in a borrowed apartment while my husband tried to have me declared insane. The prepaid phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Tanaka is staying at the Nines. He hasn't left Portland yet. His flight is tomorrow morning." I made a decision. An hour later, I was standing in the lobby of the Nines Hotel, wearing clothes I'd found in the apartment's closet. Diana had left them there for exactly this kind of emergency. They didn't fit perfectly, but they were presentable. I asked the concierge to ring Mr. Tanaka's room. There was a long pause before he agreed to see me. His suite was on the 15th floor. When he opened the door, his face showed surprise, but not displeasure. "Powell-san, this is unexpected. I apologize for the intrusion. I wouldn't have come if it wasn't urgent." He stepped aside to let me in. The suite was large and well-appointed, with a view of downtown Portland through floor-to-ceiling windows. His two associates were nowhere to be seen. "I heard about your husband's filing," he said. "News travels quickly in business circles." "Then you know why I'm here." "I have a suspicion." He gestured to a pair of chairs by the window. "Please, sit." I sat. He sat across from me, his posture formal but not unfriendly. "Tanaka, I need a witness." Someone who can testify that I'm mentally competent. Someone whose word carries weight. And you think my word would carry weight? You're the CEO of a multinational corporation. You've built a reputation for careful judgment. If you tell a court that I was sharp and coherent when we met, they'll believe you. He studied me for a long moment. Powell-san, I have known many people who sought to use me for their own purposes. Your husband, for example. He saw me as a source of money and prestige, nothing more. I'm not trying to use you. I'm asking for help. There's a difference. Is there? He leaned back in his chair. You want me to testify on your behalf. You want me to involve myself in your personal legal matters. You want me to take a side in your divorce. I want you to tell the truth about what you saw, that's all. The truth, he smiled slightly. That is a rare commodity in business. Outside, the rain had intensified. I could see drops streaming down the windows, the city below blurred and gray. When you heard what my husband said about me, I said, what did you think? I thought he was a fool. Any man who underestimates his wife so completely deserves what happens to him. And when I spoke to you in Japanese, I thought you were remarkable. Your accent is excellent. Your vocabulary is sophisticated. You spoke like someone who had lived in Japan, not like someone who had learned from textbooks. I lived in Tokyo for 3 years. I was young, idealistic. I wanted to understand the culture, not just the language. That is the only way to truly understand a language. He paused. Your first husband was in technology? Yes. We built a software company together. I handled the international partnerships. I spent half my time in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, building relationships, understanding needs, creating solutions. And then your husband died. And then Thomas died, and I was alone. And Richard saw an opportunity. Tanaka nodded slowly. I will testify. Not because I want to be involved in your personal matters, but because I have a daughter. She is 35 years old, very successful in her own right. If anyone ever tried to do to her what your husband has done to you, I would want someone to help. I felt tears prick my eyes. I hadn't cried in months. I'd been too focused on gathering evidence, building my case, preparing for the fight. But kindness from a stranger broke something loose in me. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. My testimony alone may not be enough. You will need more evidence that you are competent. You will need to show that your husband's claims are false. I have evidence. I have documentation of everything he's done. Then use it. And when this is over, when you are free of this man who called you an ornament, you should consider returning to business. The world needs women who can build companies and speak languages and see through men like your husband. I stood and bowed to him, a deep bow of genuine respect. He bowed back. Powell-san, he said as I reached the door. One more thing. The contract your husband wanted me to sign, the one that would have given me 30% of your trust. Yes, it was not his idea. He was not clever enough for such a scheme. Mr. Tanaka's eyes were sharp. Someone else drafted that document. Someone who understood the legal vulnerabilities in your trust. Someone who knew exactly where to hide the clause that would have transferred your assets. Who? I do not know, but you should find out. I left the hotel with more questions than answers. If Richard hadn't drafted the contract, who had? Brandon? He was a corporate lawyer, but his specialty was mergers and acquisitions, not trust law. Melissa? She was a forensic accountant, but she'd seemed genuinely surprised by the scope of Richard's fraud. Someone else was involved, someone I hadn't identified yet. Back at the apartment, I called Sandra Hayes. The restraining order is filed. Richard can't come within 500 feet of you, and I've challenged the emergency petition. We have a hearing scheduled for Thursday. That's 3 days away. It's the fastest I could get. But Nancy, there's something else. Richard's attorney filed a motion to appoint a temporary guardian for you pending the hearing. They're claiming you're in immediate danger to yourself. What does that mean? It means a judge could appoint someone to make decisions on your behalf starting tomorrow. Richard's asking to be appointed himself. I sat down hard on the couch. Can he do that? He's trying. I've filed an objection, but the judge could rule either way. Nancy, is there anyone who can speak to your mental competence? Someone unimpeachable? Tanaka has agreed to testify. Sandra was quiet for a moment. The Japanese CEO? From the dinner? Yes, that's actually excellent. A respected international businessman with no personal stake in the outcome. That could sway a judge. There's something else. Tanaka said the contract Richard wanted him to sign was drafted by someone else. Someone who understood the legal vulnerabilities in my trust. Someone with specialized knowledge. Sandra's voice sharpened. What kind of specialized knowledge? Trust law, estate planning, the kind of thing a tax attorney would know. Nancy, does Richard have a tax attorney? Of course. Everyone with money has a tax attorney. Who is it? I thought back to the endless paperwork Richard had put in front of me over the years. The signatures I'd given without reading. The documents I'd trusted him to handle. Herbert Walsh. He's been Richard's attorney for 20 years. I need to make some calls. Stay at that apartment. Don't go anywhere. Don't contact anyone except me or Diana. And Nancy? Yes? Be very careful. If someone else is involved in this, someone with legal expertise, then this is bigger than your husband's greed. This might be a pattern, a system. And people who build systems like that don't let them go easily. She hung up. I sat in the darkening apartment, watching the rain stream down the windows, and wondered how deep this conspiracy went, and whether I could survive long enough to find out. Herbert Walsh had an office on the 14th floor of the Wells Fargo Center. I'd been there exactly twice in 15 years, both times to sign documents that Richard said were routine. Both times I'd trusted that my husband knew what he was doing. I didn't trust anyone now. Sandra had uncovered something troubling. Herbert Walsh wasn't just Richard's tax attorney. He specialized in what the legal community called asset protection, a polite term for hiding money from creditors, spouses, and the IRS. Over the past 20 years, he'd helped at least 6 other wealthy men separate their wives from their fortunes. 3 of those wives had been declared mentally incompetent. 2 had died in circumstances that were never fully investigated. The 6th had disappeared. It's a pattern, Sandra had explained. Walsh identifies wealthy women, introduces them to men like Richard, and then helps orchestrate the takeover of their assets. He gets a percentage of everything they steal. How do you know this? Because Diana's been tracking him for years. She's not the only woman who escaped from one of Walsh's schemes. There's a whole network of survivors. They've been gathering evidence, waiting for someone with enough resources to take him down. Now I was sitting in a coffee shop across the street from the Wells Fargo Center, watching Herbert Walsh's office through binoculars. Diana was beside me, her face hidden behind a newspaper. He meets with Richard every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, Diana said. They've been doing it for 15 years. Richard brings the documents. Walsh tells him what to file, and then they split the profits. How much has he taken? From everyone, I mean. Conservatively, $40 million, maybe more. The women he targets are usually isolated, grieving, vulnerable, like you were when Thomas died. I thought about the day I'd met Richard, the charity gala, his kindness, his attention, the way he'd seemed to understand exactly what I needed. Now I knew that understanding had been rehearsed, calculated, part of a script that Walsh had probably written. What do? We need proof, something that ties Walsh directly to the scheme. Right now, everything is circumstantial. We know Richard forged your signature. We know Walsh drafted the documents, but we can't prove they conspired together. What kind of proof would work? Diana smiled grimly. Walsh keeps records, detailed records. He's paranoid about his clients betraying him, so he documents everything. Communications, payments, timelines. If we could access those records, that would be evidence. That would be everything. I lowered the binoculars. How do we get access? That's the hard part. His office is secure. He uses encrypted communications. He doesn't trust anyone except the men he works with. There has to be someone, a secretary, an assistant, someone who's seen what he does. Diana was quiet for a moment. There is someone, a paralegal named Jennifer Cole. She's worked for Walsh for 12 years. 3 years ago, she tried to report him to the state bar. The complaint was dismissed for lack of evidence, And she was quietly let go with a substantial severance. Where is she now? Working at a nonprofit legal clinic in Southeast Portland. She took a 70% pay cut to get away from Walsh. Does she know anything useful? She knows everything. She just couldn't prove it. Diana folded her newspaper. I've been trying to contact her for months. She won't talk to anyone connected to Walsh or his clients. She's too scared. Maybe she'll talk to me. Diana looked at me with something like surprise. You want to approach her yourself? Walsh is trying to destroy me. Richard is trying to have me committed. My own stepson signed papers that would have stripped me of everything I own. I'm done sitting on the sidelines. I stood up from the table. Where's this legal clinic? Jennifer Cole was younger than I expected, mid-30s, with tired eyes and practical clothes. She was sitting at a desk in a cramped office, surrounded by files and papers, and the evidence of too much work for too few resources. When I walked in, she looked up with the wary expression of someone who'd learned not to trust strangers. Can I help you? My name is Nancy Powell. Herbert Walsh is trying to steal my fortune. Her face went pale. I don't know anyone named Herbert Walsh. Yes, you do. You worked for him for 12 years. You tried to report him to the state bar. You know exactly what he does to women like me. Jennifer stood up and walked to the door. I think you should leave. Please. I'm not here to cause problems. I just need information. Information gets people hurt. She opened the door. I'm sorry for whatever you're going through, but I can't help you. He's going to have me declared mentally incompetent. My husband is filing papers tomorrow. Walsh drafted the documents. The same documents he's drafted for at least 6 other women. Jennifer hesitated. Her hand was still on the doorknob, but she wasn't pushing me out. What do you know about the other women? She asked. I know 3 of them were committed to institutions. I know 2 of them died under suspicious circumstances. I know 1 of them disappeared and hasn't been seen in 8 years. And you think you can stop them? I think I have to try. Jennifer closed the door. She walked back to her desk and sat down heavily. If I talk to you, my life is over. Walsh has connections everywhere. Judges, prosecutors, police. He knows how to make problems go away. I'm not asking you to testify. I'm just asking for information. Anything that could help me build a case. A case against Herbert Walsh? She laughed bitterly. People have been trying for 20 years. He's untouchable. Nobody's untouchable. Everyone makes mistakes. Jennifer was quiet for a long moment. Outside, I could hear traffic passing, horns honking, the sounds of a city going about its business. Finally, she spoke. There's a safe in Walsh's private office. He keeps paper copies of everything there. Contracts, communications, payment records. He doesn't trust digital storage because he knows it can be hacked. Where's the safe? Behind a painting. A landscape, something with mountains. The combination changes every month, but it always follows the same pattern. The first 2 digits are the month. The last 4 are the year of his first marriage, 1987. Jennifer looked startled. How did you know? Diana told me. She's been researching Walsh for years. Diana Powell? Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. Richard's first wife? She's alive? Very much alive, and very interested in seeing Walsh brought down. Jennifer leaned back in her chair. For the first time since I'd walked in, she looked hopeful. If Diana's involved, then maybe this could actually work. It will work, but I need your help. She was quiet again, thinking. I let her take her time. I understood what I was asking. I was asking her to risk everything she'd rebuilt, to go back into the darkness she'd escaped, to fight a man who had destroyed so many lives. Walsh has a weakness, she finally said. His ego. He believes he's smarter than everyone else. He believes no one can touch him because no one's ever managed it before. How does that help me? He gets careless, especially when he thinks he's winning. When he filed those papers against the Morrison woman, the one who disappeared, he celebrated with champagne in his office. He left his safe open for 3 hours while he gloated. You think he'll get careless with me? I think he already has. The contract he drafted for your husband. The one with the hidden clause. That's his signature move. He's used it at least 4 times before. If you can prove he drafted it, you can establish a pattern. How do I prove that? The original contract would have his fingerprints. Literally. Walsh has a nervous habit of touching the edges of documents while he reads them. It's how he was almost caught 10 years ago. But the evidence was suppressed. Fingerprints. I thought about the contract Mr. Tanaka had declined to sign. Where would that contract be now? Richard would have kept it. He keeps everything. It's one of the things Walsh likes about him. Richard's paranoid about paper trails because he thinks they protect him. Where? His home office, probably. The filing cabinet behind his desk. 3rd drawer. That's where he keeps the sensitive documents. The information clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle. I knew that filing cabinet. I'd dusted it for 15 years. I'd never once thought to look inside. If I get you the contract, can you help me match it to Walsh's other documents? Prove the pattern? Jennifer nodded slowly. I made copies before I left. Evidence that never made it into my complaint because I couldn't explain how I got it. But if you have the contract and I have the comparative documents, we can prove conspiracy. We can prove murder. The word hung in the air between us. Murder. Not just theft. Not just fraud. Murder. The 2 women who died, I said. Walsh was responsible? I can't prove it, but I know. The timing was too convenient. The circumstances were too similar. And both times, the beneficiaries of their estates were men Walsh had introduced them to. I thought about Richard. About the way he'd joked about my health. About the life insurance policy he'd taken out on me 3 years ago without my knowledge. He was going to kill me. Eventually. Once they had everything transferred. Once they had you isolated and discredited. Yes. That's how the pattern ends. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my resolve was firm. I need to get into that house. I need to get that contract. You can't go back there. Richard has a restraining order. If he sees you, I'm not going to let him see me. I called Sandra from the parking lot outside the legal clinic. I need access to my house. Tonight. Nancy, the restraining order works both ways. If you go there, you could jeopardize everything. I need documents from Richard's office. Documents that prove Herbert Walsh drafted the contract that was used to defraud Mr. Tanaka. Documents that could tie Walsh to a conspiracy spanning 20 years. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Tell me exactly what you're planning, I told her. When I finished, she sighed heavily. This is insane. You realize that, right? You're talking about breaking into your own house to steal documents while your husband is trying to have you committed. I'm talking about gathering evidence of fraud, forgery, and possibly murder. Evidence that's being destroyed as we speak. Because Walsh knows I'm onto him. How do you know they're destroying evidence? Because it's what I would do. Another long pause. I'll make some calls. If you're determined to do this, at least let me make sure the legal groundwork is solid. What do you mean? The house is jointly owned, correct? Marital property? Yes. Then technically, you have a right to access it. The restraining order prevents Richard from contacting you. Not you from being on your own property. It's a gray area, but it's an argument. Will it hold up in court? Honestly, I don't know. But if we can prove that the documents you retrieved show evidence of criminal activity, a judge might be sympathetic. I looked at my reflection in the car window. A 62-year-old woman who'd spent 15 years being called stupid, ignorant, an ornament. A woman who was now planning to break into her own house to gather evidence against her husband and his criminal attorney. Make the calls, I said. I'm going in tonight. The house was dark when I arrived at midnight. Richard's car was in the driveway, but no lights were on. I parked 3 blocks away and walked through the rain, wearing black clothes Diana had provided and carrying a small flashlight. I still had my keys. Richard hadn't thought to change the locks. Why would he? He'd been so sure I would never fight back. The back door opened silently. I'd oiled those hinges myself 2 months ago, preparing for this possibility without admitting it to myself. The kitchen smelled like takeout and stale coffee. Richard had never learned to cook. I moved through the darkness I knew better than anyone. Past the dining room where we'd hosted 100 dinner parties. past the living room where I'd sat in silence for 15 years, up the stairs to Richard's home office. The filing cabinet was exactly where Jennifer said it would be. Third drawer. I found the folder labeled Tanaka and pulled out the contract. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to be careful. Fingerprints. I needed to preserve the fingerprints. I slid the contract into a plastic sleeve and tucked it into my bag. Then I kept looking. The drawer was full of folders, dozens of them. Names I didn't recognize. Women's names. I pulled out one at random and started reading. Margaret Sullivan, widow, net worth $4.3 million. Met Richard at Charity Gala 2008. The handwriting was Walsh's. I recognized it from the documents he'd prepared for me over the years. Neat, precise, almost mechanical. Approach, sympathetic. Play the widower angle. She lost her husband to cancer. Make connection through shared loss. Timeline, 6 months courtship. Marriage within 18 months. Asset transfer within 3 years. Notes, compliant. Does not question financial decisions. Perfect candidate. I felt sick. This wasn't just about me. This was a system, a machine for extracting wealth from vulnerable women, and Richard was just one of the operators. I photographed every page with my phone. Diana would want to see this. Sandra would need it for the case. And if things went wrong tonight, if Richard caught me, at least the evidence would exist somewhere. The floor creaked outside the office. I froze, my hand still on the filing cabinet. The sound had come from the hallway. Someone was awake. Nancy? Brandon's voice, not Richard's. Brandon was staying here, probably to keep an eye on things while his father dealt with the legal crisis. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Maybe he would think he'd imagined it. I know you're in there. I heard the cabinet open. Footsteps approached the door. I had seconds to decide. Fight or hide. There was no escape except through that door. I stood up and faced my stepson. Brandon was wearing pajamas, his hair disheveled, his face a mixture of fear and something else. Guilt, maybe, or confusion. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Getting evidence." "Evidence of what?" I held up the folder. "Evidence of how your father and Herbert Walsh have been stealing from women for 20 years. Evidence of how they target widows, isolate them, strip them of everything they own. Evidence that at least 2 women have died because of what they do." Brandon's face went pale. "That's insane. Dad would never— Read it yourself." I handed him the folder. "Margaret Sullivan. Your father married her 3 years before he married me. She died in a car accident just like Diana supposedly did. Just like I was probably going to." "Diana's dead." "Diana's alive. She's been living in Arizona for 20 years, hiding from your father and Walsh. She reached out to me 6 months ago." "She's the one who warned me about the trust modification." Brandon was staring at the folder, flipping through pages. I watched his face as he read, saw the moment when understanding hit, when he realized what his father really was. "This can't be real. It's real, every word. Your father has been stealing from women his entire career. Walsh provides the legal framework. Richard provides the charm. And when the women become inconvenient, they disappear. Dad wouldn't kill anyone, maybe not directly, but Walsh would. And your father would look the other way." I stepped closer to my stepson. "Brandon, I raised you. I paid for your education. I loved you like my own son. And you signed papers that would have put me in an institution so you could steal my money. Was that your idea? Or your father's?" Brandon's hands were shaking. The folder trembled in his grip. "He said it was estate planning. He said you were getting confused. He said we needed to protect the family assets before you gave everything away to charity. And you believed him? He's my father. He's a criminal. And you helped him." Brandon sank into the chair behind Richard's desk. He looked like a man whose world had just collapsed. Maybe it had. "I didn't know. I swear, Nancy, I didn't know about any of this. The other women. Walsh. The deaths. I thought you were getting old and Dad was worried. I'm 62. I built a company worth $200 million. I served on 3 corporate boards. I speak 4 languages. Did that sound like someone who couldn't manage her own affairs? Dad said your memory was going. He said you were showing signs of dementia. The only thing wrong with my memory is that I remember too much. I remember every lie, every insult, every time your father called me stupid in a language he thought I couldn't understand. Brandon looked up at me. His eyes were wet. What do you want me to do? Help me. How? Testify. Tell the court what you know. Tell them about the documents your father had you sign. Tell them about Walsh and the system they built. They'll destroy me. Dad will cut me off. Walsh will come after me. Walsh is going to prison. Your father is going to prison. The only question is whether you go with them, or whether you help bring them down. Brandon was quiet for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the rain against the windows, the house settling, the sounds of a home that had never really been mine. Melissa was right, he finally said. She told me something was wrong. She told me not to sign those papers. I didn't listen because I wanted Dad to be proud of me. Your father is proud of people who help him steal. That's not the kind of pride worth having. I know. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I know that now. He handed me back the folder. Take it. Take whatever you need. I'll testify. Even against your father? Especially against my father. Because if I don't, I'm just like him. We spent the next hour going through Richard's files together. Brandon knew the system better than I did. He knew which folders were important, which contained evidence of fraud, which implicated Walsh directly. By 2 a.m., I had everything I needed: contracts from 6 different women, financial records showing the flow of money from their estates to Richard and Walsh's accounts, communications that proved they'd conspired together for decades, and most damaging of all, a memo in Walsh's handwriting discussing exit strategies for women who became problematic. This is enough, Brandon said. This is enough to send both of them away for life. Not quite. We need Walsh's records too, the ones in his safe. How are you going to get those? I thought about Jennifer Cole, about the combination she'd given me, about the pattern Walsh followed. I have a plan. We left the house together, Brandon carrying half the documents, me carrying the rest. In the driveway, we stopped. Nancy, I'm sorry. For everything. For signing those papers. For not questioning what Dad was doing. For not being a better son to you. You're not my son. You're my stepson. He flinched like I'd slapped him. But you could have been, I continued. You could have been part of my family if you'd chosen to be. Instead, you chose to be part of your father's scheme. I didn't choose, you did. Every time you looked the other way. Every time you signed a document without reading it. Every time you believed his lies instead of looking at the truth. I opened my car door. The question now is whether you'll keep making that choice, or whether you'll change. I want to change. Then prove it. Testify. Tell the truth. Stand up against the man who taught you to be a coward. I drove away and left him standing in the rain. In my rearview mirror, I could see him watching until I turned the corner. At the apartment, Diana and Sandra were waiting. I spread the documents across the kitchen table and watched their faces as they read. This is incredible, Sandra said. This is everything we need. It's not everything. We still need Walsh's records to prove he was the mastermind. Can you get them? Tomorrow. Walsh is meeting with Richard at 2 o'clock, like he does every Tuesday. But this time, Brandon's going to delay his father. Give me time to get into the office. Diana looked up from the documents. You're going to break into Herbert Walsh's office? I'm going to expose a criminal conspiracy that's been operating for 20 years. That's happened to destroy women like me, like you, like all the others whose names are in these files. If I'm caught, I'll be exactly where Walsh was planning to put me anyway. In an institution, declared incompetent, stripped of everything I own. I straightened the documents into neat stacks. At least this way, I go down fighting. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a small, fierce expression I'd never seen on her face before. 20 years I've been waiting for this. 20 years I've been gathering evidence and hiding in the shadows and hoping someone would be brave enough to take him on. I'm not brave. I'm angry. Same thing, in my experience. Sandra stood up and began organizing the documents into folders. The hearing is tomorrow at 9 a.m. If we present all of this, we can get Richard's petition dismissed. We can prove you're mentally competent. We can show the judge exactly what kind of man has been trying to have you committed. And Walsh? One thing at a time. First we save you, then we destroy him. I looked at the kitchen table, covered in evidence of crimes that spanned decades. Women's lives reduced to dollar amounts and timelines. Marriages that were nothing but elaborate cons. Deaths that were never investigated. Tomorrow I would stand before a judge and prove that I wasn't crazy, that my husband was a criminal, that I had every right to fight for what was mine. And then I would go after the man who had orchestrated it all. Herbert Walsh thought he was untouchable. He'd been destroying women like me for 20 years, hiding behind expensive suits and legal jargon and connections in high places. He was about to learn that even ornaments can shatter. The courthouse was cold on Thursday morning. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Sandra, wearing a simple gray suit that Diana had helped me choose. Professional but not flashy, the kind of thing a competent woman would wear. Richard sat across the aisle with his attorney, a silver-haired man named Marcus Webb, who charged $800 an hour. My husband looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, his suit slightly rumpled. The stress of watching his empire crumble was taking its toll. Brandon sat in the gallery, apart from his father. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod. He was here to testify, just as he'd promised. Judge Catherine Morrison entered the courtroom at 9:05 a.m. She was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. Sandra had called her the best judge we could have hoped for. We're here on the matter of Richard Powell's petition for emergency guardianship over Nancy Powell, the judge said. Webb, your client filed this petition claiming his wife is mentally incompetent. Present your evidence. Webb stood up, straightening his expensive tie. Your Honor, Mrs. Powell has exhibited concerning behavior over the past several months. Confusion, memory lapses, erratic decision-making. Last week, she disrupted an important business dinner and made wild accusations against my client. We have a psychiatric evaluation prepared by Dr. Morrison recommending further assessment. Objection, Sandra said. That evaluation was conducted without Mrs. Powell's consent, based entirely on information provided by the petitioner. It's not an objective assessment. I'll allow the evaluation into evidence, but note its limitations. Continue, Mr. Webb. Webb presented his case for 20 minutes. The psychiatric evaluation. Statements from Richard about my supposed decline. Business associates who'd been coached to testify that I seemed confused. When he finished, Sandra stood up. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence that this petition is part of a deliberate scheme to defraud Mrs. Powell of her assets. A scheme that has been operating for years, involving not just the petitioner but his attorney, Herbert Walsh. Webb shot to his feet. Objection. This is completely irrelevant to the question of mental competence. On the contrary, Sandra said, it's directly relevant. If we can show that the petitioner has been systematically working to isolate and discredit Mrs. Powell in order to steal her fortune, then his claims about her mental state become suspect. Judge Morrison leaned forward. I'll allow it. Present your evidence. Sandra laid out the case methodically. The forged trust amendments, the unauthorized bank transfers, the documents from Richard's filing cabinet showing the pattern of targeting wealthy widows, the memo from Walsh discussing exit strategies for problematic women. The courtroom grew quieter with each revelation. Richard's face went from confident to worried to panicked. Webb kept objecting, but Judge Morrison overruled him every time. We also have witness testimony, Sandra said. Brandon Powell, the petitioner's son, is prepared to testify about his involvement in the scheme and his knowledge of his father's activities. Brandon stood up in the gallery. Richard turned to stare at him, his face contorted with rage. You wouldn't dare, Richard said. I'm your father. That's exactly why I have to do this. Brandon walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Over the next hour, he laid out everything he knew. The documents his father had asked him to sign. The conversations he'd overheard between Richard and Walsh. The moment he'd realized what they were really doing. My father told me it was estate planning, Brandon said. He told me Nancy was getting confused and we needed to protect the family assets. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because facing the truth would have meant admitting that my father was a criminal. And what made you change your mind? Sandra asked. Nancy showed me the files, the records of all the other women my father and Walsh had targeted, the pattern that went back 20 years. Brandon's voice cracked. I realized I'd been helping them destroy my stepmother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd paid for my education, who'd treated me like her own son even when I didn't deserve it. Objection, Webb shouted. The witness is clearly being coached. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Powell. Brandon looked directly at his father. I'm sorry, Dad, but this has to stop. What you've been doing, what Walsh has been doing, it has to end. Richard tried to respond, but Webb grabbed his arm and whispered urgently in his ear. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison called a recess. I stepped into the hallway and found Melissa waiting for me. How's it going? She asked. Brandon was incredible. He told the truth. Melissa smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. He's been up all night. He couldn't sleep. He kept saying he'd wasted 15 years being his father's son instead of being the man he should have been. He's still young. He has time. What about you? After all this is over, what will you do? I thought about the question. For 15 years, my identity had been tied to Richard. Nancy Powell, the quiet wife, the ornament, the woman who signed whatever was put in front of her. I'm going to build something. I don't know what yet, but something that's mine, something that helps other women who've been through what I've been through. Can I help? I'd like that. When court resumed, Sandra called one more witness. Tanaka had flown back from Japan specifically for this hearing. He testified through an interpreter about the business dinner, about Richard's insulting comments in Japanese, about my fluent response. Mrs. Powell was sharp, coherent, and in complete command of herself, Mr. Tanaka said. She analyzed a complex contract in minutes and identified provisions that my own lawyers had missed. If this is a woman with mental problems, then I hope my own mind is so troubled when I reach her age. Judge Morrison smiled at that. After Mr. Tanaka stepped down, Webb made a final argument for the petition. It was weak, desperate, and everyone knew it. Judge Morrison took less than 5 minutes to rule. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. The evidence presented clearly shows that Mrs. Powell is mentally competent and that this petition was filed as part of an ongoing scheme to defraud her. I'm ordering an immediate investigation into the financial matters raised during this hearing, and I'm referring this case to the district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. She turned to Richard. Powell, I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel. Based on what I've seen today, you're going to need it. Richard's face was gray. Webb was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from his client. In the gallery, Diana sat quietly, watching the man who had stolen her life finally face consequences. But we weren't done yet. At 2 p.m., while Richard was at home contemplating his ruin, I walked into the Wells Fargo Center. The security guard nodded as I passed. Diana had arranged credentials that would get me into the building. Herbert Walsh's office was on the 14th floor. His secretary was at lunch. His associates were in a meeting. The hallway was empty. I used the key Jennifer Cole had provided. The door opened silently. Walsh's office was exactly as Jennifer had described it. Expensive furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, a landscape painting on the wall behind his desk. I walked to the painting and lifted it off its hook. Behind it was the safe, 12 to 1987, the combination Jennifer had given me. December 1987, the month and year of Walsh's first marriage. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were stacks of folders, handwritten notes, financial records going back decades, the complete documentation of Herbert Walsh's criminal enterprise. I photographed everything, every page, every folder, every damning piece of evidence. Then I heard the elevator ding. Footsteps in the hallway. Walsh's voice talking to someone on his phone. I don't care what happened in court. We need to accelerate the timeline. Get the accounts transferred before... He opened his office door and stopped dead. I was standing in front of his open safe, my phone in my hand. Mrs. Powell. His voice was eerily calm. I don't believe we've met. We've met. You've just never noticed me. I was just an ornament, after all. Walsh closed the door behind him. He was a tall man, distinguished-looking, with the kind of silver hair and expensive suit that made people trust him. I assume you've been talking to Jennifer Cole. Among others, Jennifer was always too idealistic. She didn't understand that what I'd do is a service. These women, they don't know how to manage their money. They'd give it all to charities and con men. I protect them. You steal from them. You have them committed. You kill them when they become inconvenient. Walsh smiled. It was the coldest smile I'd ever seen. I've never killed anyone. I simply facilitate outcomes. When a woman becomes problematic, when she threatens to expose the arrangement, things happen. Natural things, accidents, health problems. The world is full of dangers for vulnerable women living alone. Is that what was going to happen to me? Eventually. But you surprised us, Mrs. Powell. You weren't supposed to speak Japanese. You weren't supposed to fight back. You were supposed to be like all the others. Quiet, compliant, easy. He took a step toward me. But you made a mistake coming here. This office is soundproofed. My associates are loyal. No one will believe anything you say against me. I'm not planning to say anything. I held up my phone. The red recording light was blinking. I'm planning to let you say everything yourself. Walsh's smile disappeared. You wouldn't dare use that in court. It's illegally obtained. Maybe, but the documents in this safe aren't. The forensic analysis of the contracts you drafted isn't. The testimony of Jennifer Cole and Diana Powell and 6 other women you thought you'd silenced isn't. I slipped the phone into my pocket. The recording is just for insurance. You can't prove anything. I already have. While you were meeting with Richard, the police were executing a search warrant on his house. They found everything in his filing cabinet. Right now, they're on their way here with a warrant for your office. As if on cue, there was a knock on the door. Walsh? This is the Portland police. We have a warrant to search these premises. Walsh's face went from confident to terrified in an instant. He lunged toward the safe, trying to grab the documents, but I stepped back and let him pass. The police entered just in time to see Herbert Walsh frantically shoving papers into his jacket. Walsh, step away from the safe and put your hands where we can see them. I walked out of the office and into the hallway where Diana was waiting. It's over, I said. Not quite. She nodded toward the elevator. There's one more thing we need to do. We drove to a small house in southeast Portland, a neighborhood of craftsman bungalows and old trees. Diana knocked on the door. A woman answered. She was in her 70s, frail but sharp-eyed. Diana, is it really you? Hello, Margaret. Margaret Sullivan, the woman from Richard's files, the one who supposedly died in a car accident 15 years ago. Diana told me you were alive, Margaret said to me. I didn't believe her. I've been hiding for so long, I forgot what it felt like to hope. You don't have to hide anymore, I said. Walsh is being arrested as we speak. Richard will be next. The system they built is finished. Margaret started crying. Diana hugged her. I stood in the doorway and watched 2 survivors comfort each other. This was why I'd fought. Not for the money, not for revenge, but for all the women who'd been silenced and stolen from and left with nothing. The ornaments were speaking now, and the world was finally listening. 3 months later, I stood in my garden, planting tulip bulbs for spring. The house was mine now. Richard was in federal custody awaiting trial. Walsh had been denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk. Brandon stopped by every Sunday for brunch. He was working at the nonprofit legal clinic where Jennifer Cole had found sanctuary. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his career helping people instead of hurting them. Melissa had moved back in with me temporarily. She and Brandon were working on their marriage, slowly rebuilding trust. Some days I thought they'd make it. Other days I wasn't sure. But at least they were trying. Diana had finally come out of hiding. She was working with prosecutors to build the case against Walsh, identifying other victims, helping other women who'd been trapped by the system she'd escaped. And I was starting a foundation. The Thomas Yang Foundation, named for my first husband. It would provide legal assistance to women who'd been defrauded by their spouses, help them rebuild their lives, make sure they knew they weren't alone. I patted the soil around the last tulip bulb and stood up, brushing dirt from my gardening gloves. My phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Tanaka. "The deal is finalized. Looking forward to working with you." I smiled. Tanaka Industries' North American expansion was going ahead after all. But this time, I was the one handling their legal affairs. The contract was in my name. The partnership was real. Richard had called me an ornament. He'd called me ignorant. He'd planned to steal everything I owned and leave me with nothing. Instead, I had my home. I had my family. I had my work. I had purpose. And I had something Richard had never understood. I had always been enough. I just needed the right moment to prove it. The tulips would bloom in April. By then, the trials would be underway. Walsh and Richard would face justice. The women they'd hurt would finally be heard. But tonight, I would sit on my porch and watch the sunset over the city I'd claimed as my own. I would drink tea from the cup Thomas had given me 20 years ago. I would remember the girl who'd studied Japanese in Tokyo, who'd built a company from nothing, who'd loved 2 men and survived them both. I was 62 years old. I had been married twice, widowed once, betrayed once. I had lost everything and rebuilt it from the ashes. And I was finally, completely, myself. Not an ornament, not ignorant, not silent, just Nancy. And Nancy was enough.